morning, guys. Today we're going to start our new unit on trigonometry. Before we begin anything from the textbook, it's important that we do a quick review of what you know about trigonometry. It's the basics, but if you don't know this stuff, the rest of it becomes much more challenging. So let's get the easy stuff out of the way. When we're dealing with trigonometry, trigonometry means the study of triangles, and you've actually been dealing with the most simple way to handle triangles since elementary school, which is your Pythagorean theorem. What you need to remember about your Pythagorean theorem, obviously, is the formula, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, but really that c is your hypotenuse, and your hypotenuse is the longest side, which is this guy right here. It is across from the 90-degree angle, and it is the longest side of your triangle. I do want to do a super quick setup on this one. So if we are looking for our missing side, if this question is what it asked, I've got the two legs and the hypotenuse. When I plug it into my formula, I am plugging in the 6.5 into the c, because the 6.5 is my hypotenuse. Okay, so let's look. I've got a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So my a and my b, here, let's go c squared equals a squared plus b squared. Okay, just let me make these little exponents so you can see what's happening. Okay, so I always start with my formula rewritten. My c squared is my hypotenuse. I am going to plug that in first. Okay, now my a and my b, those are the legs of the triangle. They do not matter which one you plug in. So I could plug in the x first and then the 6 second, or you could mix those up. The only thing you have to make sure that it is in the right spot is the hypotenuse. So in this example here now, we are solving for the x. So even though our formula has a plus sign in it, I will need to bring this onto the other side. So my next line is going to be 6.5 squared. And then I'm going to take this plus 6 squared, I'm going to bring it onto the left-hand side, but instead of a plus, when I brought it over, it had to become a minus. Let me just get the subtraction sign in there. There we go. All right, so now when I want to figure out what x squared is, I'm simply going to evaluate each of these. So 6.5 squared is 42.25. We're going to subtract 6 squared, which is 36, and that should give us x squared. 42 minus 36. Oh, I'm sorry, this should be 25. There we go. 42.25 minus 36.25 is 6.25. And now you take the square root of both sides, and you should get 2.5. Okay, so at this point there, my x value is 2.5. Okay, so basics about Pythagorean's theorem. That's the first thing you need to know about triangles before we get into any of our trigonometry. Okay, the next part about trigonometry is being able to label your triangles. So consider the same triangle. I have triangle A, B, and C, and I've written it out twice. When you're labeling your triangles, it's going to depend on what angle you are looking at. Okay, so if I want to sit here and I want to label everything in relation to A, that would be different than if I labeled everything in relation to angle C. Picture yourself sitting on the couch at home, maybe watching TV, and you've got your family there. So let's get you an imaginary family. If I said, you know, where is mom? Well, if mom is on your left, but on your sister's right, who I'm, depending on which person I asked, would change the answer of where your mom is sitting. So it's the same idea here with these triangles. So when I label everything, the first thing you need to do is figure out what angle you're looking at or dealing with, okay? We never deal with the 90-degree one. We just assume it's there, and we know that the side across from it is always your hypotenuse, okay? So let's go back to our first one here, where my triangle, I am labeling angle A. Look at your two sides. So the longest side is your hypotenuse. The side that is across from your angle that you're interested in. This is opposite to your angle, okay? Opposite is another word meaning across. Okay. This side over here, which is beside the angle in question, is called your adjacent. Okay, oops, there you go, ADJ, adjacent. And adjacent means beside. So this is beside angle A, so it's the adjacent, and this is across from angle A, so this is the opposite. Now, that's how we labeled it in this triangle. But if we decided instead to label angle C, when I look at my triangle, the hypotenuse stays the same. This side now is across from angle C. So this is my opposite. Okay, that was different than my first one. And this here is beside my angle C. So this is my adjacent. Okay, so I need to tell you that because based on the angle, you're going to label your triangles differently. So if you're doing a question and I'm looking at a specific angle, I label everything opposite, adjacent, hypotenuse. When I go and do a second part to a question, if I change my angle, I need to relabel my triangle. Okay, so let's quickly look down here and let's label our sides based on where my angles are. So if I'm looking at this one here, the longest side is my hypotenuse, so let's put an H. Okay, this is across, so this is the opposite, right? Because opposite means across. And this is beside, which is adjacent, so this is the adjacent. Okay. If I'm looking at example B, there's the angle theta that I am looking at. Find your hypotenuse first. Okay, H for hypotenuse. I'll try and use capital letters here. This is across or opposite. Okay, opposite. And this is adjacent. Okay, because it is beside. Okay. And then the last one, just to get an idea again, label your hypotenuse first. It is the longest side. There's the hypotenuse. Here is my angle theta. This is the side across from theta or opposite to theta, and this is beside theta. So this is adjacent to theta, okay? So make sure that you are comfortable labeling everything. Okay, now we get into the things that you guys really think about when we're talking about trigonometry. The most basic part of trigonometry that we teach you are your basic primary trig ratios. Most of you know them by the term SOHCAHTOA, and we'll get to that in a second, okay? So these are your primary trig ratios: sine of your angle, cos of your angle, and tan of your angle. Now, sine of your angle, if you were to look at an angle, would always be your opposite over your hypotenuse. Okay, I'm going to keep these rectangles here. Cos is your adjacent over your hypotenuse, and tan is your opposite over your adjacent. Now, you have to have these memorized. In order to do any of the questions, you need to know which trig ratio deals with which fraction. So let's look at sine, opposite over hypotenuse. I'm going to say O for opposite and H for hypotenuse. A for adjacent, H for hypotenuse, and O for opposite and A for adjacent. There we go. Let me just close these in so you can see the trig function. There we go. So if you take a quick look, S for sine, sine equals opposite over hypotenuse. SOH. So cos of the angle is adjacent over hypotenuse, CAH, ka. And then tan is opposite over adjacent, TOA, TOA, TOA. So we use this weird acronym, okay? An acronym is just something to help you remember a long formula or sentence. So SOHCAHTOA is an acronym to help you remember which fraction goes with which trig ratio. So SOHCAHTOA tells you that sine is the opposite over the hypotenuse. Cos is adjacent over hypotenuse, cos adjacent, and tan is opposite over adjacent, tan OA. Okay, so SOHCAHTOA helps you remember these three ratios. Okay, now before we actually get to using them, and this will be the last part of our review, please make sure that your calculators are in degrees, and let's make sure that you can find your trig buttons on your calculator and make sure that you are getting the correct answers. So take your calculator, find the sine, cos, and tan buttons on your calculator, plug in sine of 33, Find it, plug it in. You should get an answer of 0.5446. Keep about 3 or 4 decimals when you're doing these. Okay. And then tan of 33, if you plug it in, remember you guys can pause the video at any point. Tan of 43, you should get 0.9325. Again, I'm rounding, so do proper rounding rules. If you are not getting these answers, chances are your calculator is in radians. Just like we measure things in centimeters versus inches, you can measure angles in degrees and radians. So we are working in degrees, so make sure your calculator says degrees. You should see a little D or a DEG somewhere on your calculator screen. If you don't see that and you see an R, you have to find a way to switch it. So make sure, play around with your calculator, maybe reset the mode until you can get these 2 answers. Okay, above your sine, cos, and tan, you should see buttons that look like this. Cos with a little -1, sine with a little -1, and tan with a little -1. Those are the inverse trig functions. So this is, or reciprocal trig functions. This is the inverse cos, inverse tan. Okay, and we use these when we are trying to find an angle. So find your calculator. Chances are you're plugging in the inverse button and then the number. When you plug that in, you should get 76.44. And when you do sine, the inverse sine of a half, make sure you're putting the 1/2 in brackets. So bracket 1 divided by 2 and close your bracket again. You should be getting 30. So until you can get these answers and label your triangles, don't move on. Okay, make sure you can get these before you go on to the next section. That's it for your review. Take care, and we'll see you later.